But I still am that parent advocate, of wanting to make sure that we get things right for our kids. Because I will tell you, I was a dad first of kids, and then an educator. Because again, I taught preschool, elementary, middle school, and high school. And then also taught both gen ed and special ed, of doing that. But I think the biggest hat that I wear is I'm the father of 4 kids, and 2 who happen to have disabilities. And they're all really old. Our oldest son was born before even the law. So we really were excited when we got special ed law, going through that. So this is an area that's really near and dear to my heart, because we had to do lots of planning. And you're going to be doing lots of planning. And what I tried to do tonight is, because usually when people do person-centered planning, they usually think about it only at transition time, as going into adult. And I'm going to back it up, because I think we need to start really planning, because you're going to hear a lot of jargon, and I tried on one slide to give you the best places to go for person-centered planning. Because you're going to hear PATH, you're going to hear Circle of Friends, you're going to hear MAPS, you're going to hear, and to me, they're all one and the same. I guess if I had to describe it early on MAPS to me is the process. And then if you look at PATH, we'll talk about that. That's the kind of the outcomes, or the schedule that you're going to get to where you want to be. To me, Circle of Friends is under that umbrella, because to me, that's where we start with young children. Because my goal was that our kids have friends early on. That's why I'm working with the district, because I'm such a believer in inclusive practices. Because I think our kids, if they don't grow up with their siblings and typical peers in school, what's it going to be when they get out? Because to me, they need to be by typical peers throughout the day. Because they're going to be the future neighbors. They're going to be the future, employer. They're going to be the future legislators that's, looking at disability. So if they're still down the hall and away, we're not going to see things change. And so that's why when we start with this, we're going to start just with the IEP and talking about when kids should start coming and really doing person-centered planning young. That's why I'm really excited to see families here with such young kids instead of waiting, because a lot of families wait and only think person-centered planning is when you get about ready to get out of high school. And we can't wait that long, looking at that as we go through. So hopefully, my goal is, you already know what an IEP is, but we're going to talk about how it incorporates into this process. The process of transition, that's when you move from school to adult. What is self-determination? Because to me, this drives everything. To me, this is another word for person-centered planning. Because we really have to plan so our sons and daughters are making their own choices. And you're going to hear me say a lot, it's the focus on the individual or the person. Not even the team when we get together. It's truly looking at that. How students can actively participate. Because to me, kids need to be at their IEP meetings. And we'll talk about all the research I've done and what makes sense when they need to start coming to their IEPs. And then creative ideas for preparing for the future. Because to me, we can't wait. We need to start planning now for when they get out of school. And I will tell you, I do this because I think we waited too long. Because we were still learning. Like I said, our son was born before the law, and we were learning as we were going. Look, now there's so much research, because my oldest would be 46. So in the law, I hadn't even been around that long, in doing that. Then I have a 45, a 43, and a 39. So my kids are all old. So you can imagine how old I am, looking at that. To me, an IEP, you already know what it is, but I think I just wanted to reintroduce, it's individualized. And I go to a lot of IEP meetings and I don't see individual. I see that everybody gets the same thing. And to me, that's why it doesn't really relate, but it does to person-centered planning. It's about the individual. Not the program, not what everybody else is doing, But what it does is say it's going to tell us what should our kids learn and how are they going to teach it and what help are they going to get. Because special ed's all about specially designed instruction. But hopefully, at least working with Patty and Deb and the school district, I mean, they have a big belief system that kids should be included. Now again, when it's appropriate. Because I will tell you, we have a system that we do pull some kids out, but we also pull typical peers out. So they're not away from typical peers during the day, of looking at that. And they'll eventually, it takes time, but they'll get there, and then the IEP team. Because it's almost like IEP is person-centered planning, if you really think about it. It's just another word for it. It's that individual education plan, but that's where you sit down and you talk about what does this student need? What are we going to do to meet their needs to make them successful when they get out of school? So, we really do person-centered planning, even though we don't call it that. The tenets of it, they're very similar. It's a group of people getting together. Now it's more school-based. When we start about person-centered planning, that circle grows because we'll talk about it. You're going to be inviting lots of different people to person-centered planning, when they start coming about. What's in an IEP? What's the student doing now? You're going to hear current level of placement, current level of performance. And again, this is really important because I want to know what kids are doing now. What's baseline? And so when you go to IEP meetings, I would really be asking, or even telling them. If my child goes to school every year, I'd always write a letter to the school or the new teacher saying, this is who we are, this is what my child can do, this is what motivates. Because I don't think we spend enough time talking about what motivates a child. What's their background information? What's going to excite them? Rather than, well, this is what they can't do. Now early on, it makes more sense because we're trying to look at their needs. But when you have sons and daughters going through the system about, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, we already know what they can't do. I just want to talk about what we're going to do rather than talking about needs, because we waste a lot of time at meetings talking about need when we talk about what are we going to do this year? How are we going to educate? What's going to really excite them? What motivates? Because I want to know how they're going to learn, what modality, how it will be taught, extra services, goals. Now, again, we could spend a whole day on I have some parents come in, they want 20 goals or 15 goals. And again, a lot of times that depends on the disability. But again, then my question is, I usually went as a parent, because hopefully if kids are included, they're already in the curriculum. And by law, they have to be learning what other kids are learning. I don't care what level of ability. They've got to be exposed to gen ed curriculum. The question I get, though, because then I think, again, and that's why I'm so glad to see the schools and the parents working so closely together here, because usually what I find is parents want all the, because if I don't put all these down, the school won't do it. But I will tell you, if you've got 15 or 16 goals, I don't know how teachers are going to do it, because they need to collect data on everything. And that's why usually when I work with parents, a lot of parent groups, especially in IEP, training, I would say I would pick 3 or 4 priorities. And you're going to really, and hopefully they'll collect really good data. Because my goal is they're always going to be in the curriculum, but here's what we need to work on, of doing that. Because like with our oldest son had multiple disabilities. And we always had 3 or 4 goals. One, he needed lots of language or speech, because he didn't have language. He only had 5 words to his vocabulary. Mama, Papa, Titty for Kitty, Petty for Peggy, and F.U. as clear as a bell. And so it was interesting, of looking at that. And like when we get to that area of transition we talked about, like I was told the group on Saturday, he wasn't going to be a Walmart grader. Hello, F.U. He had to really plan around the language that he knew. Of looking at that. That's where that individualization comes in, of doing it. And then particularly, if the student is 16 or older, then they start talking about transition. And that's when, by law, students need to attend their IEP meeting But we're going to talk about students starting at least by 3rd grade and really doing some person-centered planning. Because it's all about them rather than us and doing that. And then at 18, they need to have their own rights because they're their own individual. And that we'll talk about that because that really gets interesting in person-centered planning. Guardianship and all of those kinds of issues in doing that. Goals, I'm not going to go over, of looking at that. But we were just having the conversation. When you're doing that, can they graduate? Can they walk through the ceremony and then stay in school? I mean, you get into some real, and a lot of parents across the country, this becomes a real issue when you really get into inclusive practices. Because I think people think and parents think automatically their son or daughter get to stay till they're 21 or 22. If we're really inclusive, why aren't they graduating at 18? I mean, are we speaking out of both sides? I mean, we have to really depend on the student, doing that person-centered planning, of looking at that as we go through. And then thinking ahead. Transition is really important. But I'm so excited that we've got young families here. I mean, I just bow to you that you're coming so early rather than waiting, of really looking at what's happening and going on, and doing that. And then when they're 18, we'll talk about it. They make their own decisions. Because then you have to get in. We'll talk about that in the person-centered planning. Are they going to be their own person? Or are you going to become guardian, limited guardian in a lot of states now? Because why should they give up all their rights? We talk about inclusive practices, but then they have to give up their rights. Because having 2 sons with disabilities, one, we didn't think anything about it because he's making all of his own decisions. Other son who had a lot more kind of issues, medical issues, we really do we want some medical decision making and some financial, because he had a hard time with money. But we didn't want to take any other rights away. Because if you do full guardian, they can't vote. I mean, there's a lot of ramifications. So this is why guardianship and really talking about when they become adults early on rather than waiting is really important, of looking at that. And then graduation. Will they graduate? At 18, we talked about that. What's the school policy on graduation? I'd be asking now. I know you're going through that. We just had that conversation. And if they get services after graduation, where's it going to happen? Because I know Patty and them are working on really a transition program that's really going to be not, because I have a hard time with kids. It's just not age appropriate for a 22-year-old to be with a 14-year-old. And not that ages don't matter, because when you get out of school, I've got friends that are 20 years older and whatever, but when you're really looking at what's age appropriate, what does that look like, of really going through. And then changing locations with age. Because to me, when kids are 18, where are they? They're usually in college, or they're at work. They're not in high school. So what should that look like when we start talking about person-centered planning? In doing that. Because I will tell you, both of my boys exited, even though one was still under the umbrella up until 22. My other one literally graduated at 18 with a disability. But I will tell you, he didn't stay in high school, the other one. He was out of school, and we'll talk about that when we'll give some examples of person-centered planning. So how do students get there? Related services. We've got to talk about transportation to work, learning to go from place to place. I mean, when we get into school, and I know it's all about academics, but like my second son, or my oldest son with the disability, I mean, I will tell you, I was one of those parents at which let me just tell you, I was not popular, with the school system. Never argued in this and that, of doing that. But again, if you start asking questions or sometimes you challenge, you get a reputation, because for years I kept hearing DH, DH, DH. And to me, in my mind, being in the field, I thought it stood for developmentally handicapped. it wasn't until years later they said, you were dead from hell. Of going through. Because I was very honest and very open, and I'll never forget one time when we lived in Columbus, Nebraska. Our son had real issues, and I heard that through the grapevine that the director, thought we were just mad and didn't like him and this and that. I finally had to call him, and his name was Mike also, and I said, Mike, I've heard this rumor. We may not always agree, and I'm going to challenge, and I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to whatever. I don't know you from Adam, except to be at meetings as the director. I hear you're the pillar in the church. I hear you this. Why would I be mad at you? I'm just advocating. And that's why through the years, I never said we were going to bring an advocate. We always brought a support person, because advocate had such a negative connotation, of doing that. But we need to look at all of the supports that are going to be in place when we really talk about, designing for person-centered planning, of doing that. And then again, to me, the biggest thing that we should be teaching in school, that I hope you're going to have conversations, even from itty bitty, are we teaching kids to be self-determined? Do we give them choices? Because sometimes it's just like moving them through, of looking at that. And sometimes they don't buck the system, and they need to stand up for themselves. Because to me, it's making decisions about their own life. To me, that's a basic, bottom line thing of when you talk about person-centered planning. They've got to make decisions about their life. And I will tell you, moms and dads, it's hard. And it's hard to cut the apron strings when you have a son or daughter with a disability. Because my other kids, my two typical kids, were saying, cut the apron strings. Because we'd ask our kids if they were able, but you didn't ask us. Why are you asking them? Like the 5th degree. And I will tell you, it's hard, of doing that. And so we have to learn from each other. And I will tell you, students can learn self-determination by helping develop their IEP. Because to me, that's the beginning of person-centered planning. Most people don't think in those ways. They think of adult, they think of transition. To me, we can't start early, of doing that and going through. Because you can't decide the future if you don't get any choices right now. And I think people are doing much better about giving students and sons and daughters choices. Even if they don't have language, whatever. Even if they can't speak for themselves or advocate for themselves at this point, we've got to find a way. Because my biggest thing when I talk with teachers, particularly when I was a principal or even as a director, my biggest pet peeve was when I saw kids get to 3rd and 4th grade and they didn't have a communication system. I don't care if it's eye blinks. I don't care if it's gestures. I don't care if it's sign. People can't tell what they want if they don't have to me, we've done a total disservice if a kid does not have a communication system. I don't care if it's the most primary communication system in the world. Our sons and daughters need to communicate. Because they got to start telling us what their choices are and what they want. Take academics out. Take everything else. If we don't give them a voice, we've not done our job. Even though I'm so academic, but to me, that's bottom line. We need to make sure that kids have a way to communicate. I don't care what method, of looking at that, but that should be top priority. It's just like my son. He was going to read, and by God, he was going to read. Well, my son didn't read. My other one read about 2nd grade level. So my one son, I had a paraglued to them. We had everything else. He didn't read. But hopefully he could communicate. Of looking at that and doing that. So where do we start? We have to be taught how to be an effective part of IEP meetings. Now hopefully, sometime I don't know if you've had IEP training and what your role is and all of this and all of that, but our kids need to be at IEP meetings because it's their life. It's not even ours. Even though I am a big advocate. It was so interesting to me because I always talked for my kids, and I'll never forget when our second son was in middle school. And we went to school one day because they were very included, in school. And we went, and the principal met with us, and was it the school psychologist? Anyway, they brought Genevieve and myself in, and they said, we think Brian needs to go down to Mike Goss's classroom, which it was a self-contained classroom, because Brian had been very included. And we said, oh, okay, let's think about that. Let us go home. And, we went home and told Brian we met with the school, and it was so interesting. 2 ahas as a dad. Because the first thing we said is they think you need to go to... His first words out of his mouth, and excuse my language because we don't use it anymore, that's the retarded room, I quit school. Well, with Brian, we knew he had an intellectual disability. We had looked it up, then it was retard, but when he would look that up, that means you're slow in an area, but Brian knew he had gifts in other areas, because we always wanted to build self-esteem. Yes, you've got issues, you need to know it, it's a matter of fact, but what are we going to do about it? He knew what he wanted. So 2 ahas. One, because I went into inclusive practices because of research. I hadn't even thought about the social-emotional aspect. So here he was because his comment was, I dress like the other kids, I act like the other kids. Why do I have to be there? Because when I work with schools, I say, you can flower any room you want, not call it special ed, but everybody in that building knows it's that room. So how can we look at service delivery different? Of looking at that and going through. The other aha is his comment was, why were you at school talking for me? And that was my first, holy crap. Because we hadn't included them in their IEP meetings. We hadn't even given them the voice. We're martyrs. We're going to advocate for you. Looking at that. That's when the first time I started thinking, okay, we need to... In other words, what he was saying is, get your buns over. I'm me. I'm going to tell you what I want. Of looking at that. So it was real hard, to try to move yourself out of that after you've been that real ardent advocate for how long, of looking at that. And that's when we start saying about, to me, kids need to start coming to their IEPs at 3rd grade, when I've done all the research and looking at everything. It doesn't mean that they're there the whole time. Because we'll have kids come in, and I will tell you, it even changes the tone of the IEP. Because we'll have a kid come in, and if nothing else, their first time, because it scares people. Because can you imagine a student with a disability coming in by law into their IEP at 16, and here's this mob? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say anything. I haven't even been. We don't even prepare kids to start being self-determined or the person-centered planning unless we start really early. And so that's when we had kids come in and, this is my teacher, this is my speech person, and then they introduce and would leave, if that's it. Or come and pass out the agendas. Or many times if we were before or after school, we'd say, can you ask your mom to bring snacks? Because if you have them after school, blood sugar's low. If you really look at research, people are crabby. So after school isn't the best time. I'm just serious. Of really looking at that. But they need to have that say. And then we need to build them as they come up. So every year. Because even when because we'll see some slides where, you see this, all the research out there, student-led IEPs. The thing of it is, when I started interviewing students across the country, how do you like? Have you led your IEP? What do you think of it? I will tell you about 90% of them said, I don't like to lead it. Because I'm too busy planning and trying to facilitate. I don't really get to say what I want. Let somebody else facilitate and then let me be me as part of that team. So I would be asking sons or daughters if they really want to lead it or not when you get to that point. Because I will tell you, some don't. Some do, and some do just fine. Depends on level of ability, their language. I mean, there's a lot of issues that come into play. But we need to make sure when they start young that their choices are listened to. Because you're going to see, if we don't listen to them, we've just blown them out of the water. If we're really going to listen, they need to be included in decisions. They need to understand what's being decided. They need to be with typical peers that are the same age. And my question, have you ever invited one of their best friends or a typical peer to their IEP? Because the school or the parents can invite anybody they want. Because we started inviting peers because they came up with lots of strategies and lots of ideas when we really started not only talking about IEP goals, but truly looking at the person-centered planning aspect. Because then we found them that we invite them outside of school. Because to me, person-centered planning doesn't take place in school. The IEP process that leads to that, but to me, we need a neutral field, and having other people in the community at the planning session, of doing that. But I can't say enough, they need to have their peers who they've grown up with, who they've listened to, who they have peer relationships with. They need to be at IEP meetings and particularly at person-centered planning meetings. Because I will tell you, with Chris not having language, when they get older, you start thinking differently. Because I'll never forget one time, Genevieve and I sitting. I just never forget sitting on a couch in one of our places. And the thing that worried us the most when we were having a discussion is, they can learn all they want academic-wise. Our biggest thing, because what we were finding with adults with disabilities is, they do transition planning, and they'd really they could find them a job and they'd go to work, but then they had no friends. They didn't have a totality of life. And our biggest thing is, I don't care how smart you are, I just want them to enjoy life. I want them to have friends. I want them to go out to activities. I want somebody to take them if they can't drive. It's really asking all those kinds of things, when we start getting into that. That's why peers are so important when we get into that point, of looking at that. And I will tell you, students usually know what kind of help they need. Literally. I gave the example the other day. We had a student in high school, and she would be in a typical class, and it was interesting. But after 10 minutes, she would start screaming. Nobody could figure out why. Because she couldn't tell us. She was confined to a wheelchair. And so, we had the behavior specialist in. We had that family they took her to a neurologist. After $7,000, one of the peers sitting at the IEP said, "You know how y'all move from butt cheek to butt cheek? How you squirm in your chair and get up? She can't move. And after 10 minutes, she's hurting, so we need to move her." A peer. After we paid $7,000 to keep us so smart. I'm looking at that. You can't imagine what a difference that makes. Of truth. And that's why inclusive practices are so important. Treated with dignity and respect. And that's why I know Patty's developed the language list. Because I know, we don't even use the word case manager. Because when I've talked to kids across the country, I don't want to be somebody's case and I don't want to manage. I need a service coordinator. Are we being very respectful? Of looking at everything that we do. That's why people first language is important. That's why rather than regular ed, it's gen ed, because if you're regular, does that make us irregular? It's a mindset thing that we almost need to doctrinate everybody in language. I'm looking at that as we go through. And then they need to practice making decisions. So if I can tell you nothing else, I hope at home you're making them make decisions. Even at a young age, either this or this. I don't think we do enough of that. I know with Chris, we did everything wrong. And that's why I had to go, because Chris would just look at you if you ask him to do something. What choice do you want? I didn't give him enough, processing time. How come you're not answering me? It was just, I was in his face then. And then we got behaviors and whatever.